Hi everyone, welcome back again for this last conversation in our panel of discussions celebrating the Photo Book Awards. I'm very happy to welcome tonight and today and this morning in California, Carolyn Drake, whose book Knit Club was selected as part of the Photo Book of the Year. The 10 titles, and Susan Meiselas, who is the president of the Magnum Foundation and who was a member of the pre-jury who selected among 700 books received, the 31 books that you can see in exhibition at Del Pirenco in Paris. Once again, I would like to thank Paris Photo and Aperture Foundation, of course, for this wonderful opportunity besides the circumstances we had to finally set up this exhibition and these awards. Now, Susan, I give you the floor.
Well, thank you, Mathieu. And of course, we really wish we were in Paris, almost everyone on this call. But thank you again to Aperture and Del Pier for 2 amazing days of rich and diverse exchanges. And so I think, and also for this opportunity to speak with you, Carolyn. So we're going to speak about the Knit Club, and I think just for some of you who may not know Carolyn's work, though you should by now, a quick, short, extremely short intro would be that about 20 years ago, you launched your photographic life by leaving an interactive job in design, and you produced 3 self-published 3 books when you were living abroad and in Istanbul. And so I think it's important to show, this is the first one.
This is the first one, 2 Rivers, self-published book, number 1, Wild Pigeon. And the first 2 books, 2 Rivers and Wild Pigeon, were made in Central Asia. This one, Western China, and 2 Rivers in the former Soviet republics in Central Asia. And then the third one is Internet. And it's a smaller project from Ukraine.
So it's important. Now we're talking about the 4th book. We're talking about Knit Club, and we really decided we're going to focus on the process. So the first question obviously is, Central Asia, quite some time, what brought you so-called home to America and where you chose to be? How did that journey begin? I think you're going to share some slides, and just for the audience, we're just going to go through the process of from the idea to the making of this object. So a little bit of that history.
Yeah, so are you seeing my screen share now? Let's see. Hopefully you're seeing a shot of the yes. Open book. So first of all, just thank you, Susan and Del Pire and Aperture and Paris Photo for inviting us to do this presentation. And it's a real honor to have participated in been part of the shortlist this year and to listen to a lot of the conversations this weekend. So this book, Knit Club, yeah, it was like, I had lived abroad for almost a decade, and my work had been a lot about kind of foreign places and people that were from different cultures from mine. And after that much time kind of investigating in that way, I felt it was time for me to return to the country that I came from and kind of go through the process of figuring out how to make work close to home and in more familiar places. So my partner and I moved back to the US, and we took a road trip from Omaha, Nebraska to New Orleans. We wanted to go to like the heart of America, you know, and really just embed ourselves and live in, you know, America, whatever that was. And so on this road trip from Nebraska to New Orleans, we ended up finding this town, a small town in Mississippi called Water Valley, where there was affordable rent and interesting community. And we just decided to move to a small town of 3,000 people. And that was kind of the start for us. And it was just living there and becoming part of this community was a thing unto itself. Like I lived there for 2 years and I barely took any pictures during that time. It was also, you know, I had spent 10 years being a foreigner and an outsider in these places, and I came back to America and had chosen this place where I was also kind of a foreigner. I wasn't from the Deep South, and I had never been to Mississippi, you know, in my life before. And so during those 2 years, I didn't take very many pictures at all. I was fascinated by the oral culture there, the storytelling, the talking, that, you know, you'd go out on the sidewalk in the town and you'd end up spending 2 hours just talking to people you run into. So that was, but we ended up having to move away for financial reasons. It was hard to make a living there, but I really kind of had to figure out a way to make some work in this place. And eventually I got this grant to kind of make a body of work somewhere in the South. And so I knew I wanted to go back to Water Valley. And so I kept going, I kept taking these trips back, trying to figure out what to do. And thinking about how to depict this place, and thinking about truth and like how to be authentic, you know. And I found, and kind of looking around for inspiration of what other people had done before, and the thing that struck me most was this I had never read William Faulkner before, but while I was living in Faulkner territory, I read his book As I Lay Dying, and I was just blown away by this piece of fiction that somehow it just seemed to encapsulate my experience in this community. This book where all the action and the things that happened are kind of never really said up front. And the other thing that I was really inspired by and I loved was the narrative structure in which there's not like there's no narrator, there's no kind of omniscient author. It's the narrative is passed or is conveyed through these very different voices. Each chapter is like a different character speaking, and you as a reader just have to kind of piece together yourself what you think happened by reading these very different voices.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was,
of course, that's kind of the way we live everywhere. I mean, bits and pieces that we piece together. You know, maybe say something about the difference between being an outsider in Central Asia and then being an outsider in your own country, in a different part of the country than you come from, and how you make that transition. I mean, Faulkner comes from that place. You don't, and yet you find a way through the feelings you have that you may be even projecting on this place. How do you then come to connect? How do you get to the next stage of connection?
Well, for me, it happened through an experience. I mean, let me switch to this slide that somehow helps me talk about this. I just had a really hard time trying to make pictures in this place because I didn't want to play this role of like this kind of role that had been played over and over of like the northerner or the outsider coming down and trying to tell a story about the South for their audience in New York, or, you know, the New York readers. And there's certain stereotypes that you associate with the South if you're from New York or from the North. And I felt myself seeing those stereotypes around me and not feeling like it was my place to reproduce them. And the thing that happened that was kind of like a breakthrough for me was when I came back for, you know, probably the third return trip since I had left. And I was actually, it was in part because I was doing this show of my wild pigeon work, and I wanted to put the words from that wild pigeon book onto these rugs. And I commissioned my friend Coulter in Water Valley to embroider the rugs. She's a textile artist. She's an amazing textile artist. And so it was kind of a collaboration with her, and I bought these rugs on Etsy and had them delivered to her studio. And I flew out there to kind of help her with that, but also on the side do my photo project, which I didn't know what it was yet. And so I did this ride along with a police officer and the Yalobusha County police deputy, and it turned into this high-speed chase on the highway with this guy trying to escape from Memphis down Highway 55, and we got into like a multi-car accident. That was like my first day shooting there, and it was scary, and just, it made me, basically the next day I went into Coulter's studio, and I spent the next 2 weeks just kind of like nurturing myself by being around Coulter and her quilting frame, and actually helping her embroider these rugs for my show rather than taking pictures. And that was the point where I put down the camera, and I was sitting with Coulter and her friends who were also kind of into this sewing stuff. They had this little community of women who was really interested in that, and they would come in and help with these rugs, and it was just so kind of nurturing. And it was the first time that I really felt like part of something in this town. Like I had become part of this community. And that was the point at which I kind of found this project. And at the point at which I felt inspired and ready and comfortable to like pursue something with the camera.
So then,
and that's the Knit Club. Those women who I met, I mean, some of them I knew already from having lived there, but I didn't really know that they had this whole sewing community that kind of formed their social relationships in some way, until I was like sitting there sewing these rugs with them. And it was so strange to like have lived for 2 years in this place, and I knew Coulter, but I had no idea that this kind of like, it was almost like this underground kind of thing that went on behind the scenes that I never had known about for some reason. And that was like, so I started kind of working with these women and exploring this idea of like, well, this question I had is like, why I have spent so much of my life like running away from things I associate with like womanhood and femininity, which I saw as like stereotypes and constructs that had to be broken down. And I had always gone off away from the house, away from domestic life, off traveling around the world using a camera. And I was asking myself like why I had resisted that so much, and why now at this one point was I feeling so nurtured by being around a community of women and this kind of collective. And so that's kind of where this work started, is wanting to investigate my relationship to like the constructs of femininity and womanhood and motherhood.
Yeah, sort of an interesting moment of fusion, sort of both being a photographer can separate you, but you found the way through photography to become part of this community in a new way. I mean, and yet a circle, even be it a knitting circle, I mean, classically is inclusive and exclusive. You know, it sort of includes
Yeah.
people, excludes others, and the idea that this was happening you didn't know about doesn't totally surprise me.
Yeah,
But
and I think you also, like, the idea of collaboration is something you've been interested in a long time. And for me too, like, I think the knitting circle represents a kind of departure from the idea of like the artist being, you know, this kind of isolated person who operates, you know, with their own kind of spiritual inspiration from outside the world and society. And
yeah.
So the idea of the collective and participation and collaboration is something that was also part of this.
You know, I also think this idea of a circle, it's funny, I just had a free association of a circle of women braiding a young woman's hair in Africa, which just was mesmerizing to watch. And it's a similar, everyone participating in that case in making one transformation of a young girl's head. But of course, when they're making, were they working on individual projects, or was it a collective project when they're in that circle together?
You're asking in the knitting club?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, most of them, like Becky Tatum, Catherine Montague, Megan Patton, and Catherine, did I mention that? They're really into like quilting, and then Coulter is an art, like more of a artist, I guess. Right. But there's these questions that are also really interesting about what's the difference between a craftsperson and an artist. And that's what I ask myself a lot, because a lot of these women make quilts and they're very kind of, I mean, some of them you might follow a pattern, but then you break the pattern sometimes. And they're, you know, between their restaurant job or their social work job, they'll come home and like work on these quilts and share them on Instagram. And there's this Facebook group that we're also part of, this kind of secret Facebook group where people share and post their concerns.
So Carolyn, I'm just curious because, I mean, there's a whole history of quilt making, but very often women are doing it together, making a single object versus each working on their own.
Yeah, right.
So I was just curious, which was it? And I think it's an interesting point, the artist versus craft, but we were really more focused on the bonding of a circle, I think. Mm-hmm. And that experience.
Yeah, they work on their own projects, but they're very inspired by each other, you know, and you can see the influence people have on each other. And actually, you know, there's this whole generational thing that's part of it too. Like Coulter's mom came into town from Georgia and gave a quilting lesson, and that's what started a lot of these people on quilting. And then
so
people
go back to, I don't want to get too much in the weeds of the quilting, but get to the place that you were heading in a different direction, which was this circle of inclusion that you're in some way feeling part of, and you begin to co-create with them. You were talking about the participation, the collaboration. And of course, this is a jump here when we're looking at this photograph. So I think maybe make the transition of how do you get to this place?
So I decided to kind of work with these women and sometimes their children, because a lot of them were mothers. And in the town, there are a lot of old houses that are kind of historic and crumbling and empty. And a lot of these women were actually involved in restoring these houses. So I found houses that I could get access to, and I would just set up photo shoots in the house or in the woods surrounding them and invite people to come to the photo shoot. And sometimes one woman would be helping with the lighting or contributing props, and somebody else would be in front of the camera, and then the next time it would switch around. So it was people in this community helping with the shoot, giving ideas for the shoot, or becoming in front of the camera. And I also was like put myself in front of the camera at some points as well.
So
and yeah,
were they co-creating the ideas? I mean, when you look at this image, you know,
I mean, it was also kind of spontaneous. Like there was, like I would, you know, this is my project. I mean, that's the thing. Like there's the whole idea of collaboration is a very positive, moral sounding, ethical sounding word. And I think it is in a lot of ways, but I mean, you know, the bottom line is that my name is on this book, even though Coulter invented the Knit Club, but of course it's not the first knit club, but there is this point at which this is mine. And like, so,
yeah.
but yeah, they were giving ideas and they would suggest a house or a room to shoot in or a prop to use. And yeah, so, you know, it's collaborative, but it's also mine. And that's part of it. It's like, yeah, that's what I was.
Well, those are boundaries. Yeah, no, I think it's great to talk about that and, you know, feel the tension of that. You know, that's honest, you know.
I mean,
So
it's also like the idea of working in these houses and playing with these constructs of femininity and properness, which are basically like often associated with like domesticity. So we worked in the house with whiteness. So, and with passivity, with submissiveness. And, you know, the question of like the role that the camera plays in reproducing those aspects of femininity or womanhood, with the gaze of the camera being a source of control. And that was something I thought a lot about, like as a photographer or the person holding the camera, like, am I like, how do you resist reproducing like the male gaze with the camera? And a lot of times for me, that was by obscuring the face, and also by drawing images from the visual culture and kind of tweaking them and kind of disturbing them from their, putting them, kind of altering the order of the real world, so that I wasn't reproducing the real world and the kind of problematics of like womanhood that I saw in it, but more kind of tweaking it and giving it some disorder.
Right. Well, it also feels like this fusion between a kind of fact-based fictional space. And of course, you know, I feel the interaction. I just wonder what is behind the scenes, you know, at what point directed, at what point it's invented, it's intuitive. The little girl at below holding, is that the mother's daughter or not? I mean, there's a lot of mystery, sometimes in the images per se, and sometimes in the sequencing. So keep showing us more, because I feel like the audience is desperate to see more, I'm sure. Like this one, you know, kind of a wild, totally wild image, you know. Where does this?
Yeah, I mean, you know, what's hard is like, you know, the last time I spoke about this work, it was with Paul the Sheik, the publisher, and we decided to not show any images when we talked about it. And it's like, the whole, I want to resist explaining it, because it's the whole idea is that these women who are kind of out of the, there's only one man in this book, and he's walking away into the woods. And this whole idea of like producing a world that's not gendered, that's actually includes only women and it excludes men. And what is it like, you know, what kind of danger do we associate with the idea of women getting together and doing something unexplainable outside the gaze of men? And so you know, the unexplainable is the power of it, I hope.
Right.
But yeah, there's definitely an amount of like spontaneity, like
It
you
feels
know,
very
when,
much like a secret world that, you know, and I just don't want to be too secretive from the audience who's desperate, probably wanting to see
like,
more, hear more. Like, you know, this is just such a fantastic image, you know, and how it comes.
well, this one is actually, so this is me. It's like a self-portrait. And I think there was one day when the shoot was canceled. And so I just went and made the picture myself. And I had borrowed this nightgown from one friend and this mask, which was someone's son's Halloween costume from another friend. And went into this was my favorite room in this one house. We used a lot. It was just, I had been wanting to like work with this wallpaper for a long time, and I just hadn't found the right situation. So I just climbed up on a ladder and like took 50 pictures of myself with the self timer. And it's just like, yeah, the kind of conglomeration of like all these different symbols that don't go together and putting them there into one frame was kind of,
Yeah. Well, I would never have known this was a self-portrait. That's fantastic. You revealed that, but you know, so let's keep moving, because I know at some point you're making a book. So the knit club becomes an object, and I know that shifts out of the experience of the making and the processing and the relational aspects, but then you make this thing, you know, and I know you made it with others collaboratively. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, that was, so it's,
I mean,
the whole collaboration.
Question, Carolyn,
yeah.
How did you know you were done? Because everyone always asks, how did you know you wanted to kind of shift from the process into the making of something? Because I think that's a very important, you know, just a juncture.
Yeah, it's hard. I mean, my previous projects, you know, 2 of them at least were many, many years. It took them to kind of making work and putting them together. And this one seemed, it just seemed, you know, I actually can't answer that question because I just felt like I had finished shooting. Like, I didn't want to like keep forcing it beyond what it was. And this ended up being a much smaller and more compact book than I've made in other projects. And I think I wanted to kind of practice like being concise and restrained, both in the design and in the kind of quantity of images.
Can you show us a little bit more? Show us a little more. Yeah. The design is pretty classic initially.
Yeah, and I worked with TBW, and the editing of the book it's very classic. And I mean, you open the book and there's the title page, and you know, I think there's 40 or 50 pictures. There's okay, well, with this frame, I can tell you about the text, which is like a huge part of the book. So basically I invited Rebecca Bengal to create a text for the book, and we decided to model it after the Faulkner book, As I Lay Dying, which both of us, the structure of which both of us loved. And so she called on the phone a bunch of the women in Knit Club and interviewed them, and then pieced together, kind of tweaked some of the quotes that she liked, pulled the quotes out and then tweaked them and strung them together in a way that kind of formed a narrative about this Knit Club, and in a method and manner very kind of following Faulkner's guide.
Faulknerian. What's so interesting about that is that I didn't realize that she hadn't been there when I read that. And I felt the characters interweaving, and you in the midst of that. Again, it's linear, but it's circular. It comes back to each of you contribute and continue to contribute for a couple of pages. And I have to say, you know, we're not showing the whole book. Of course, we don't have time. But before you get to this, just you divide the book. I mean, you don't see the writing in the beginning of the book, which is really an important decision. It feels like it's in the middle of the book, it's an interruption of the process, and you begin to get to know the characters and the community really that you're part of through those words, which is an important decision in bookmaking, right? I mean, where are those voices, you know?
Yeah, and I think that was one of the things that I think the text really enhanced the book in a way, because the pictures themselves don't give voice to the individual characters, and we made that come out through the text. So while the pictures leave a lot of mystery, there are certain details and facts and individual truths that come through in these characters you read about in the text. And to me, and I think Rebecca, we both felt that was an important thing to add, to kind of root, in a way, to root it in reality, even though the text isn't, some of it is fictional actually, but it does ground it in more clues about reality. And
Well,
yeah,
you know, as a reader, it gives you the opportunity to sort of dive in deeper when the visual narrative is so open and so, you know, as you say, mysterious in a certain sense. It's magical thinking. And so then you land on these voices that feel very grounded in a real place with the history, et cetera, that they share individually and collectively. So it's a very important moment, I think, in the book to then shift out again.
And yeah, I mean, the other thing about the text is the voices are sometimes conflicting. They have different points of view. So I think it also helps break up this idea that there's one kind of universal idea of what a woman is. They're all women and they're not the same. And yeah.
Show us a little, do you want to talk about the double spread? Because there's a shift.
Yeah, there's, so the way we very carefully edited the images, and there's, you know, certain visual motifs that recur from beginning to the end. And then we arranged it so, like, in the first half, we aligned the pictures on one side, and then the text kind of interrupts in the middle and breaks the whatever poetry of the sequence. And then on the last half, the pictures are aligned on the other side. And then every once in a while, there's this interruption of this double kind of spread. And we just tried to kind of set up a rule, but it never is fully followed. And there's these little things that happen that break your expectations. So whatever kind of assumption you might have about what comes next is not fulfilled the way you think it will.
I know. I don't know how many more pages you have. I'm sure people want to see more.
Okay.
Turn the page. Well, no, don't turn too fast. I mean, you know, I know that they want to see what you're talking about. So,
I mean, the circles is something.
You know, we've been talking about circles, and here it is. You know, a fantastic circle.
I was really, I love this. This is one of my favorite images. If you look closely, or if you see a big print someday, there's like, it's made of all these scattered things we found in this one house, like some of like bullets or bullet canisters, buttons, a remote control for the air conditioner, an old radio, and then different pieces of fabric and zippers from Coulter's studio.
And was everybody contributing something to this image, or did you create create it and then photograph it? I mean, how did it come to be?
I don't want to elaborate on this one.
Okay, that's fine. But show us more.
I can tell you about this one is because this is Catherine, and she, well, first of all, I wanted to, so Coulter had this like Alice in Wonderland kind of costume, was probably from Halloween, and I had wanted to use that in some way. And I thought about like a rabbit hole, but kind of finding, you know, some symbol in the real world that kind of had the vibe of like going into this kind of unknown space. And so we found this drainage pipe, this giant drainage pipe that went under Main Street. And we did this shoot with Catherine wearing Coulter's costume by this drainage pipe. And when Catherine saw the PDF of the book later, and I mean, she had seen the images along the way, but I remember she took a road trip to California and we had lunch, and she was like, you know, the images, it's not me. I think she was also talking about the text and how she had been quoted. And she was like, it's not me. You're not representing me. But I understand there's something else that this project is about. And so I felt that was, that kind of, that's true. I'm not representing these women. I'm exploring this concept of knit club and how I can visualize it. And then at the end of the book, there's these masks that kind of thread throughout. Sometimes the mask is the mold of the mask, and sometimes it's the mask. And there's all these questions about like the vessel, the reproducibility of a mold, you know, and the negative and the positive, and those things are kind of connected to the idea of a photograph as well. But also, this is the image that comes at the very end of the book, and it's one of those moments where we had staged this event of inviting the women to have their faces molded, but it was a spontaneous moment as well, where her daughter, Jackie's daughter, came and just, she had to sit there for, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes while it was drying, and her daughter just came to comfort her while she was waiting and not seeing her face. So this is one of my favorite images, but it also kind of, you know, as a woman who's getting older, I think a lot about the fact that I chose not to have motherhood be part of my life, and the aspects of life that I miss out on because I chose not to do that, and the freedoms that it also has given me. So that's one of the things I also thought about a lot while making this work, is like being around all these women who have children and being able to experience that life in a certain way from being with them and making this work. So,
well, I noted that you dedicated the book to your mother. And so it's kind of, there are two bookends. I mean, we're talking photographic and visual narrative, etc., but there's this beautiful poetic dedicating the book to your mother and saying that you're not a mother. There's very little, there are very few words of your own, but that's very strong, those two places that you situate. You know, I think there are probably going to be lots of questions. I don't want to not give other people an opportunity to ask you some things. Let me just quickly, because there's one question, which I think is a great one. How has this work changed Carolyn?
How has it changed me? Oh, it has actually, it changed my work. I mean, I can't tell you how much being around these quilt makers and personalities has influenced my work, like my practice. Like I've drawn I learned a lot from Coulter and the other women in their fabric work, and I've incorporated a lot of that into mine and found ways of making work at home. I mean, I have all these projects in my backyard and also related to like surveillance that's conducted from within, you know, the walls of your house on the outside. And these questions about being at home, I guess, are the core of the work that I'm making now. Do
you want to say two more words about that? Because I know that. I think we're not showing it. We don't have time, but I think people would be fascinated by the backyard project. So just a little tiny bit.
Yeah, like I've been, under the COVID, I've been making these kind of sculptures in my backyard that are made, some from the fabrics in my quilting studio, and then some from the organic material in my backyard, and some from the demo that I do when renovating my house, and mixing it all together in this very precarious sculpture that I can photograph just before it kind of falls down when the wind comes up here. And that's been part of a daily kind of image. I mean, not every day, but it's something I've been doing periodically under COVID.
So they're going to have to wait. They're going to have to wait to see it. But the work is fantastic, and it's so, you can see the thread between the, literally, you were talking about needles and I'm talking about threads, because somehow I feel the thread through the work progressively, you know, from wild pigeons. It's there. It's an underlying kind of current in the work that keeps shaping, you know, creating new shapes for, you know. I think there are a couple of questions I want to make sure to, I mean, one is really, I didn't ask this, and you can feel the tension between is it a series or are they unique photographs, and when whether or not you're making them, thinking of them as related to each other, or do they sit outside of each other, in tension with each other?
The images in Knit Club?
Yeah.
You mean, how do they relate to each other?
Well, literally someone's saying, do you like making series of photos or unique ones? And I feel you're doing both, but how do you see it? How do you know, is it a series? I mean, it goes back to, you know, what ties them together in your mind? This place, is it about the place? Is it about the feeling that you have for the place?
I think that I definitely think of it as a series, but hopefully some of them stand alone as well. But I would much rather share them as a series than a standalone, because I mean, I was exploring certain ideas using a certain method and process in a certain place for all of these images. And I think when they add up, you know, together, it means more than just viewing one of them. Especially because there's these visual motifs that kind of repeat in different ways from image to image. So I like the idea of multitude rather than singularity.
Good. Now, somebody's asked one question. I know some of you are going to want to drop off soon, but because we're the very last ones, we get a few more extra minutes. So I'm going to keep you longer, Carolyn, because I think this is a complex one. You touched on it a bit with the notion of collaboration and how you understand compensation is the question in relation to your collaborators. And that's, take that in whatever way you want to take it. I mean, I don't know that I never feel it's transactional in your work, but I wonder how you think.
I mean, there were some shoots where I paid somebody to assist me, and there were some shoots where people assisted me without being paid. And it depended on the person, what they needed, what their interests were. I think the women in Knit Club, to them, like, the idea of it being a transaction is just preposterous. Like, mostly it would be just irrelevant, the idea of money, it being transactional in any way. I mean,
you know, you feel, and it's kind of like the process, particularly in this work, of people participating in quilt making and knit clubs and sharing literally the needles and threads and their creativity. It feels like the photographs are coming right out of that cultural exchanges, you know?
Yeah, I mean, but there's also, like, I commissioned Coulter to make the rugs for my show, and she was paid very little. I wish there was more money to pay her because there was a lot of labor, but then I bought a quilt of hers. And so there is transaction, you know, and we all have to make money. And I want to buy another one of Coulter's quilts, Coulter's quilts, but I think they're probably a lot more valuable now than I can afford. But
so I just want to go back to one thing that's coming up in a couple of the Q&As, and that's this question, of course, the audience is wanting to know how you're making and why you're making particular images. And I think you might want to say something about how they're not titled, there aren't captions. You're not giving us those levers as many artists and photographers do. You're asking us to be with you in this process without, revealing what the surface of the image, how it came to be, what it
Yeah,
is.
they're definitely, I mean, this project is straying further from like photojournalism than I've gone before. They're not meant to be captioned images that kind of tell what the story is. It's very much leaving the viewer to have an experience, and one that is going to be interpreted by the viewer themselves rather than by a caption. And that's just my intention in this work. They may, yeah.
It's in a way an expression of the distance you've traveled. When we talk about where you began 20 years ago, in Central Asia, you had a very different kind of mission and sense of purpose, and then you've progressively evolved your own visual language. So this feels, to me, evolutionary, really, and expressive of that fusion that you're experiencing, you're becoming the insider, as much of an insider as an outsider can be, which is kind of a great place to be. Someone just wrote, it looks like a visual novel. Wonderful storytelling fulfills that essential need in humans. And I think that's such a wonderful comment, and definitely true. When you get to have this magical book in your hands and you turn the pages, it will remain mysterious, not just because Carolyn wants you to live in that space of the not knowing, the unknowing, and the wondering and questioning. Do you want to say anything else before we close to people who we will find somewhere?
Yeah, I hope it's a really new body of work. So I hope most of the books are still on a boat from China. So there's the arrival date keeps getting pushed back, but I hope whoever has ordered them will get them soon, hopefully before the end of the year. And I'm just very grateful to have this chance to talk with you. It's always a pleasure, and I really appreciate the mentoring and support that you provide to me and a lot of other people. So thank you, Susan.
Well, I do love that detail. I forgot the Magnum Foundation gave you a small grant that was part of your Southern travel and your journey. So if we had the tiniest part of inspiring this long trail, which is basically, a kind of, I hope people in the audience have gotten a feeling for. What I love is you're not knowing, and you're sharing the doubts, and the not having a predetermined destination, and yet you have another wonderful book. So thank you, Carolyn, for being so generous. Thanks for generosity and leaving people to wonder. That's that's great.
That's great. Thank you very much, guys, for this magical, as you said, Susan. It was a great talk, very inspiring, sharp questions, very, very thrilling answers. Thank you, guys. All these conversations are being recorded, so we can have them again soon. And the exhibition runs at Del Pirenco in Paris, for those who are here, until December. It will run in January also. And I would like to thank everyone here, and especially the teams of Aperture and Paris Photo for setting up all these conversations that were very, very good.
Thank
you very much.
Stay safe.